And meeting the former Attorney General is also a pleasure, because your father arranged one dinner for us in Sydney, and he belongs to, or he visited Hazro, a place close to Islamabad, to see the origin of people going to Australia.
We've travelled extensively in the region.
Yes, that's right. Good morning, sir.
Well, I can say pleasantly good afternoon.
Yeah, I'm here at 7 a.m.
Here we are.
I had to check in with everybody just to make sure that everybody was on the right time zone before we had this call. So I'm honestly, very grateful. We're here for a cause today. So I guess, are we going live now?
Yes, we are live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We're live.
Welcome to today's episode, where we are discussing Healing America and the Reparations chapter. The wound is where the light enters is a principle espoused by Rumi. We could apply that to America and its awakening and the healing of its soul. President Biden-elect has often quoted the soul of America, and this often starts by looking within. It is, in fact, where the damage needs to be repaired. We live in an era where we have finally recognized that Black lives do matter. Though we can talk the talk, we need to now put the words into action. Demanding social justice has been looked into by the United Nations and other countries like Australia. What does true social justice entail when it comes to the rights of African descendants of slavery in the United States of America? Today we have with us the Honourable Philip Ruddock and Justice Ali Nawaz Chowhan, both of whom have played a role at the international level when it comes to the deliverance of human rights. We welcome them and share their global historical insights with you. At times, looking from outside in is where we need to start. I'm going to first start with Justice Ali Nawaz Chowhan and ask him a little more about his position on the United Nations. He has incredible world insight and has served at the highest levels of the judiciary, including the Lahore High Court of Pakistan, as a judge of the International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia. He was elected as an international judge by the United Nations General Assembly and has worked for the UN in The Hague in the Netherlands. He is the second judge from Pakistan to have served as a Chief Justice in the Gambia. The history of slavery in the United States justifies reparations for the African Americans in a recent report by the UN-affiliated group based in Geneva. I'm going to hand it over to you, Justice Ali Nawaz Chowhan, to elaborate on what the report entailed. Thank you.
I must thank you for this conference on video. For the blacks and those who were from slave descendants. I think we can begin by quoting Resolution 60 of 147 of the United Nations, which speak of remedy and reparations. I think the Inter-American Commission has also been talking of thematic hearings, and we found this mention in the 173rd conference of this body. Well, there's always been a talk of independent commission of inquiry for looking into systemic racism and questions relating to that. So this matter is really getting heated up after the death of George Floyd in the USA, and I think bodies like yourself are trying to highlight the issue so that there is some commission of inquiry appointed for finding out what are the causes and how these can be remedied in the USA. Unfortunately, the USA withdrew from the council, the Human Rights Council, about 2 years back. And although we find that Ambassador Bremberg of the USA is talking very positively, but we find many impediments in the way of establishing a commission of inquiry, rather an independent commission of inquiry. Now, well, I've been to Cambe Bolongo in the Gambia, from where this trade started, let's say 300 years back. And I saw for myself the cells in which these youngsters who were taken away were housed. The ceiling was about 4 feet, and these people were much taller. And we saw the chains and the rest of the shackles, which was a horrifying spectacle. And this is how the transatlantic trade of slavery started. Now, a wrong has been done to the African blacks, and the transatlantic trade has brought about a lot of injustice, where people have been sold, and ultimately we find even today, George Floyd had to suffer because of his skin. I think we have to robustly pursue this, as you are doing it, to dip at the conscience of human beings, that the other human beings are not to be treated that badly. Well, I must say that in case of Australia, Australians should be really congratulated for one thing, and that is that they recognize the wrong, they apologize, and we've seen the speech of the former Attorney General and the Minister speaking about it. And we find that even in case of Afghanistan, the Australians have recognized the error of those who committed atrocities. So Australians are doing a good job. But in the case of the Independent Commission of Inquiry, I think they want to tone down things. Why they are doing that, I really don't know. But I think they should support the establishment of the Independent Commission of Inquiry. And they should do it as soon as possible, because we find that 10th of December is nearing, which is the International Human Rights Day. So the earlier, the better. But when we go into the agonies, well, it's terrible. We see how people were treated, how they were burnt, how they were, I mean, the slave trade was terrible. And I've seen with my own eyes the remnant of that trade in the Gambia. Now, one thing which I want to refer to is the reference of mention is the speech of the UN, the ambassador of USA in the UN, and he talks of several countries who are violating the human rights, and the police is committing atrocities all around. Well, I must say that that is true, and that is also true of my country, where we are trying to contain all this violence. My report on police torture of Faisalabad, a city in Pakistan, and other reports on torture, and my own submission to the UPR and my report on torture to the United Nations is a clear evidence of what is happening here and how we are fighting it. But we find a lot of discussion, lot of trouble still on the human right in case of violation of rights, and we have to continuously and perennially fight the evils. Unfortunately for us, the Commission for Human, which was apex body created for human rights in Pakistan, preserving and protection of human rights in Pakistan, has completed its tour, and it's 1.5. There's a slumber on the part of the government in not establishing it, and we also find bureaucrats trying to vie for the posts because not always, but for glory. This is unfortunate. I hope see that we have people in this commission. Is very important in today's world. Can instead of criticizing us, can say that we have taken correct measures for of human. When we see correlation of human rights in Pakistan, well, there are several. We find conversions, we find gender gap index says that 151 is the position of Pakistan in that respect. We find that there were at least 2,846 cases of child abuse, and this includes gang rapes. About 162 mine-related deaths took place last year. There is no evidence of progress in implementation of safety and health standards. In the mines, the country's expenditure on health is still less than 1% of the GDP against the required standard of 6%. The journalists complained about curbs and freedom of opinion and expression besides harassment. There was an excessive and arbitrary use of exit control list. The Supreme Court of Pakistan was unhappy on the performance of the National Accountability Bureau. The Senate of Pakistan already moves a privilege motion against the National Accountability Bureau. The on National Accountability Bureau performance is a charge sheet against this National Accountability Body. There's also a spike in the crime, cyber crime and online harassment across Pakistan. Prisons in Pakistan remains overcrowded with occupancy of 134%. In Punjab, about 187 prisoners are on death row. They suffer of mental health. This includes 17 people convicted of blasphemy. This includes the Junaid Hafiz of Bahauddin Zikriya University. There are about 10,000 Pakistanis incarcerated in overseas prisons. The Supreme Court had observed that the jirgas and panchayats, which are local adjudicatory bodies, it was in violation of the constitution, but they continue to function. The process of induction of judges for special court also needs a review, as we hear of allegation of misconduct against some. Once special judges are inducted, they are out of sight of the High Court. The quality of the judgment in some of the special court is questionable. I wonder why we can't have a unique court system in the interest of justice. There is decadence in respect of criminal justice here. It has been reported that the Supreme Court overturned the death penalty in large number of judgments between 2010 and 18. The Supreme Court is burdened with more and more cases because of defective investigations, poor judgments of the court below, including service tribunals. The whole process before the plenary courts takes years to conclude. This is impairing confidence in the judicial system as people are taking law into their own hands. There are hundreds and thousands of cases pending, and these need case management for early disposal. Well, the United Nations Rights Committee was not satisfied with us with respect to the report on the Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. We also find objections coming with respect to women trafficking, and over 600 were trafficked as brides to a neighboring country. The child protection laws are still to be implemented in areas of domestic labor and child marriage. Violence against transgender community continues unabated. Same is the case with Ahmadi minorities, as we hear of murders in KPK and Punjab. A large number of people were found HIV positive. About 80% were below the age of 15 years. According to the World Air Quality Report, Pakistan is ranked among the world's most polluted countries. The case of hate speech continues to rise. The NGOs also suffered the indiscriminate brunt in this respect. There is also need for improving our performance in 28 human rights treaties. Some of these are being dealt with by a treaty cell headed by the Attorney General because of the inability of the Human Rights Ministry to handle these matters. So I mean, what the UN ambassador had said, that other countries should also improve their human rights case. So we are doing it in Pakistan, but this is really an uphill task, especially when now the National Commission for Human Rights is not functional. But I would also say that the UN body on human rights has to really work hard and be more robust and active. We find in the case of Kashmir a complete just resolutions of the body, and we find so many atrocities being committed, almost war crimes in case of Kashmir. But people are suffering in such a huge number. Same is the case with Rohingyas, Muslims from Burma. They too are suffering, and we find that there is hardly much done in this respect. UN Council, of course, passes resolutions, but it has to do much more. Same is the case with the people suffering elsewhere in the South Asian region. So, well, we have human rights bodies like the one in Australia who are doing wonderful job. I know of that because I've been active in dealing with the Australian Human Rights Commission as well. Well, anyway, it's good to raise voice, and I think Australia is doing well by voicing the fact that there must be reparation for people who have suffered. And I think USA should also do the same. Reparation is the answer. And this resolution 60 of 147 of UN on right to remedy and reparation is very important. And this should be followed. I thank you.
Okay. I'm just going to take a quick quote from a report. It says, in particular, the legacy of colonial history, enslavement, racial subordination, and segregation. It even went so far to call it racial terrorism and racial inequality in the United States remains a serious challenge, as there have been no real commitment to reparations, to the truth and reconciliation for the people of African descent. Contemporary police killings and the trauma that they create are reminiscent of the past racial terror of lynching. Now, what do you see as a solution to all of this, Justice Chowhan? I mean, how should we implement anything and remedy the situation?
Actually, yes. First of all, is the advocacy. A robust advocacy, and this is what you are doing and many more people are doing. Secondly, is this commission ought to be appointed a thematic hearing, as has been proposed by the Inter-American Commission, or we must have the independent commission of inquiry to dwell in the subject and find out the solutions, keeping in view the ground realities of different states of United States. But if USA is not serious about creating this commission, independent commission, then of course there'll be more rhetorics rather than locating or finding a solution.
So you feel that there should be a tribunal-based solution for all of this? At what levels should that be implemented throughout the US?
I would say a commission will be the best answer, because a tribunal means a trial, and you cannot try unless you have evidence who is the wrongdoer. So a commission is the prelude to any further act on this part, but this is high time that a national commission at the federal level is appointed to look into the grievance of people who were descendants from those who were victims of the inter-Atlantic trade. And we see now a big number of these people, a very large number in the United States, a big population now, but still there are bickerings and there are grievances which should be resolved now. I mean, after the Civil War and after the constitutional developments and all what has been said for equality and all what has been said against discrimination still exists. I was in Columbia University when, you see, I would meet people at the International House, Riverside Drive, and we found the Black people always telling me, oh, I've applied for a job, but I will never get it. I also remember going to the Duke University, this driver who would drive me, he was telling me once, he said to me once, oh, don't you take me to your country? And I said, why you want to go? People like to come to United States. He said, yes, I would like to go because, you know, I can't enter Lords and Taylor or whatever shop that was with you because they will suspect me that he's a thief. So this sort of thing is existing in the American society, but there are very learned American response to all this discrimination. And of course, the election of Barack Obama was also something in the right direction at the relevant time. So Blacks discrimination has to go, but there has to be a social movement, and we have to begin this more officially, more formally through the commission.
Okay, thank you. Candace, do you have any?
Yeah, I'm an American descendant of a slave, and I just want to give a little history for our viewers, of that are watching the show, and so we can bring them up to what we're talking about. I'm sure a lot of people know, but anyway, we had the first arrival of the first slave ships in the States acknowledged of African captives on the U.S. soil in 1619 in a town called Jamestown, Virginia, about 20 or more slaves. I do want to say, is equally important, they were some slaves that arrived in North America in the 1500s. Then we have 40 years of that. We have 40 years of slavery here in the United States, where my descendants and my ancestors were raped, mistreated, dehumanized, thought of as animals, worked for free labor, up until this day, like Justice Chowhan mentioned with the killing of George Floyd. I mean, there's a lot of killings like that have been going on in the United States of America and abroad. I think the African Americans in the United States in particular have suffered a great loss. We have suffered systematically. We've kept at a lower class group. When you talk about economics and wealth gap, we've suffered that. I mean, I think we make up 12% of the population, and only 2% of us are worth $1 million, make $1 million, have a net worth of $1 million. You go to Abraham Lincoln when he wrote the Emancipation Proclamation in 1963. And then you had the Special Order 15, which was a military order by General William, which he was going to confiscate 40,000 acres of land and give to the slaves, the free slaves to live on. But that was stopped by Andrew Jackson. So here we are today. We have not been paid. We're owed at least $13 trillion for all the free work that my ancestors have done on this soil. And I just think it's time, the timing is right for reparations and for the healing. I think it's more of healing. Some say that slavery was America's original sin. So if that is true, then maybe it's time for America to get right with God. And I say that with all due respect. I see it personally from a different perspective. I see the hurt in my community. I see the pain. And I think we could start like what Australia, Honourable Philip Ruddock has done in Australia with Kevin Drude with an apology. I know Obama, he gave a public apology. I don't remember him. I didn't see too much coverage about it. I would like for the Biden administration to nationally apologize for slavery. That's a good start. And then I would like to see some form of the bills. There's plenty of bills that I'm reading that have been passed through the House, HR 40, which is considered the reparations bill. Then you have the statewide legislations. You have California, and then you have North Carolina, which is a great start. But we requesting more. We're not demanding it, but we would like to see more. And I think we can afford it. And I think it would heal the world. I really do. So we can move on with this and get on with our lives. So I would like to see some funding. I believe when I was reading the commission, the compensation tribunal that Honorable Philip Ruddock was working on, I'm not sure where you are with that. I read that it wasn't approved. I'm not sure if you revisited it yet, if you plan to, but I would like to see some funding. And the 40 acres and a mule that was promised, I think that's equivalent to an acre apiece maybe, or something, and that's where I'm at with it. That is where I'm at with it. Thank you. You're welcome.
All right, I'm going to now take it up to Philip Ruddock, who is the second longest serving parliamentarian. His expertise includes being the former Minister for Immigration and Multicultural Affairs, serving as part of Australia's Human Rights Envoy, assisting the Prime Minister in reconciliation. He is currently the Mayor of Hornsby. While there is no need for him to explain his role in Australia on the reparations issue over there, I am asking that he kindly elaborate on that for the American audience that is watching. I'm kind of curious to know how the whole reparations movement went about in Australia, and even starting with the apology and where we are at now. So I'm going to hand it over to you, the Honourable Philip Ruddock, to start there.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you, and I hope you can hear me. Please signal if you can't. I will endeavour to speak loudly and clearly and to enunciate my personal interest in these issues. In my time in public life, I have held positions in our parliament from the time I was 30 years of age. I was there for some 43 years. I had the great privilege of being a minister in the government of John Howard for some 11 and a half years, as Attorney General in the latter 4. But before that, I had responsibility for dealing with immigration and multicultural affairs. Later, I had to assist the Prime Minister on reconciliation, which was an important issue involving our first Australians. And thereafter, I had responsibility for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander affairs as well. And in that context, we have had, over a period of time, a very significant need to look at our past. Our past is not unblemished, let me say that. We've had some discussion, even recently, about whether or not Australia at any time had slavery. And while you might not find slavery in the formal sense, there were many people who believed that they were treated as slaves in the circumstances in which they were brought to Australia, particularly Pacific and Torres Strait Islanders, to work as indentured labourers in the north of Australia. And so we had debate about that sort of issue even recently. But the issue involving our first Australians, and you're dealing with about a group that was, I thought, to be about 1% of our population, but possibly these days, with the way in which we identify first Australians, a larger proportion. We did have a situation where some many decades ago, there were arrangements put in place, particularly after the Second World War, to bring Indigenous people together for their safety when they thought Australia may be invaded by Japan. And there were Indigenous settlements established through North Australia, through places like the Northern Territory, Western Australia, and also in Queensland. And many of these were run by churches and in some cases state-run institutions. And you had a situation where over a period of time, when children were in these sorts of centres and it was thought that parents were not able to adequately ensure their education, young people were separated. And it was that separation that became a very significant issue of notoriety in relation to Australia. And that's where the Bringing Them Home report was relevant. It was looking at the circumstances in which young people were separated from their families, whom they never knew, but the outcomes were very variable. In many places, the children weren't necessarily treated well. There were situations in which their education was wanting, but there were equally situations in which they may well have received an even better education than if they'd remained with their families. And I know people who are of Indigenous descent who have been enormously successful in Australia because of the education they received and because of the way in which they were able to build their lives on the education that did occur. But for many, that was not possible. And so you did have the Bringing Them Home report, which was in 1997. It was undertaken by a former very distinguished member of the High Court of Australia, a number of other significant Australians, some of them are Indigenous. And that's the report that I had to look at in terms of how we were going to deal with the situation of the separated families. The most important point, of course, was to acknowledge the hurt and trauma experienced by them and their families, and to focus on how you might be able to bring them back together again. And that was very challenging, but perhaps the easiest part. The greater difficulty is to look at how you would deal with financial recompense, if that was necessary, and how you were likely to determine it. And the report that, or the speech that was noted that I delivered back in 1997 on this issue highlighted on some of those complexities. The one thing I haven't heard you speaking about today is where the funds are going to come from to be able to put in place arrangements to provide recompense. Do you go to the churches and the institutions that ran the places to which young people were taken? Are you expecting of them that they're going to be able to find the resources today to be able to provide substantial compensation? Is it the state government? Because in Australia, we're like you are in the United States. We have 6 state governments, 2 territory governments. We have a federation, and that federation is, of course, Australia. Is it the states or territories that are going to put in place the arrangements? Because much of these arrangements were supervised by state institutions. Or do you say the Commonwealth has a greater capacity to be able to tax people and to be able to produce the revenue that might be able to put in place those arrangements? And then you have to look at how many millions, perhaps billions. I mean, in the context of Australia, we were talking about potentially 1 in 3 Indigenous Australians who may have been separated. Do you look at those who were actually separated, or do you look at their descendants? I went through looking at the notes that I prepared for the speech that was the subject of comment, because I wanted to focus on how you would work out who you would compensate and who you wouldn't compensate. They are extraordinarily difficult issues. Is it to be available to children and families who are subject to contemporary separation practices, or only those who are separated in the past? Where do you make the cut-off points? They are not easy issues to deal with. And I imagine putting in place those arrangements that look back over the past and put in place arrangements that are going to ensure appropriate compensation. You know, in the United States, you've had to deal with some very difficult issues. I can remember there was a time in which those who were enslaved were encouraged to go back to Africa. You may or may not remember that. I noted some did. But, you know, when you look at the circumstances to which they have returned, there are circumstances which many might say would be wanting in comparison to what they would enjoy in the United States today. How do you deal with those issues? I don't know. I don't know the answers. But what I do know is that you need to be prepared to look at the past, learn from the past, look at how those who really need compensation are going to be able to achieve it, a very difficult task. But you also need to look at the lessons. And, you know, for me, we do have a Human Rights Commission. It deals with a number of issues. Some of them you do well in the United States. I hope you'll excuse my mischievous sense of humour. I'm 77 and I'm still the mayor of Hornsby. But I tell you, here in Australia, we have a very significant propensity to discriminate against people on the basis of their age. I don't know whether that happens in the United States. I notice you can elect a president at 77 and he's got another 4 years in front of him. You know, in Australia, maybe we've got a lot to learn about how we can overcome ageism. We do have a commissioner for ageing. We have to look at how you deal with people who have different sexual proclivity and how you ensure they're not going to be discriminated against. We need to look at gender issues and how you ensure that women are able to participate as fully and be rewarded as fully as others in business, in government, in terms of opportunities. And if you ask my family, they would say that in Australia today, women still have a very much more difficult path to tread in comparison to men. That's what they argue and believe very passionately. I look at the United States and I despair at the fact that you've not been able to deal with the arming of your population. I think, you know, the gun laws are extraordinarily different to what you might experience in other places, and you'll have to make your own judgment as to whether you think they're altogether helpful. I look at a country that still executes people. I mean, I have a view that capital punishment is in fact wrong in principle, and we in Australia have abandoned that a long time ago. Human rights are very different. and we all come to look at them in different ways. I think through the international bodies, we come together and try and share each other's experiences. But they're not easy issues to deal with. They have real complexities. And all I can say is you need to learn from your past and be prepared to have an open mind as to the way in which you're going to be able to address those issues in the future.
Wow.
Australia, some level of what they call rehabilitation. There was they call reconciliation.
You may have to speak up a little.
They call it a reconciliation report in Australia, and we also look at the restitution and rehabilitative measures that were taken. In fact, there's very similar parallels when it comes to descendants of slavery in the US and in Australia. When we look at the incarceration levels, the sexual abuse, mortality rates, substance abuse, and so forth. But you also elaborated on the revenue raising for this matter. How did you go about handling that?
Well, I mean, I would say that the financial recompense that you might regard as being just has not been achieved. I mean, we had the 20th anniversary in 2017, and there were no further advances over those that were put in place when I was commenting about these matters in 1997. The easy part is to recognise the errors and to apologise. And what you've had is the very clear willingness to look at those matters. But the real difficulty is that getting together a national government and all of the states to put in place arrangements that are going to put in place adequate monetary compensation is going to be extraordinarily difficult. And we were talking about then, 20 years ago or more, the way in which you would deal with these issues. Do you put it in the hands of the courts to be able to make a judgment when claims are made, to determine what the facts are, and whether those facts justified compensation? Or do you put it in the hands of a tribunal where the evidence that you might have to produce is of a lower order of standard, and may in fact have less impact adversely upon those who have to recall what has happened to them and what they've been through? I mean, these issues, and this is the point I was trying to make, are extraordinarily difficult to be able to deal with. And the real question is, what is the level of money you are going to have to raise? If it were trillions of dollars in a situation where you're faced with the sort of problems we have now as a result of COVID-19 and what its impact is on our economies and on people's employment and opportunities, you know, you have to ask yourself, how are those issues going to be addressed? And I suspect with great difficulty. I don't mean to be suggesting you shouldn't try, but, you know, you can't truly go back to any of the countries. I mean, I referred to what had happened in relation to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, into which people were adequately compensated for what had happened with the apartheid regime. And, you know, the issues that you might have expected would be addressed, even after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, haven't led to financial compensation in that way. And I went through and looked at what happened in other countries as well. These are enormously difficult issues. And I think it's when you're able to make the apology and endeavour to move on, it is appropriate. If you can identify people who are still suffering financially significantly, you might well be able to put in place arrangements. But I don't know that you're going to be able to look at every person who is a descendant of the original slaves and compensate them all with $1 million. You know, what would it be? You know, and you're looking at all of their descendants and all of their family I think there has to be a degree of realism. Now, maybe I'm just speaking as a former politician, but I've always tried to look at the wicket, cricket term, on which you are batting to see what are the reasonable number of runs you can actually get. And I like to get the largest outcome, but it's not always possible to score infinity.
So how did we go about presenting evidence?
You're going to have to get close to that microphone.
How did we go about being descendants of slaves and so forth? What was the level of proof required for that?
Well, look, I mean, in the context in Australia, you were dealing with children that were separated from their parents. And it was a relatively, in the context of our overall population, still a relatively small number of people. And as I said, the argument is that amongst our Indigenous Australians, which may have been, 100,000 or so people, maybe one in 3, or maybe 1 in 10. Nobody knows absolutely what the numbers were. But if you're assuming it was 1 in 10, you might have been looking at 10,000 people. A relatively small number of people that you're having to deal with. But when you're looking at the United States population, what is it, 350 million? What are those who are descendants of slaves? Are you looking at something like 30 or 40 million? Or maybe 100? I don't know. Those are the numbers you're going to have to come up with. And then you're going to say, who are we going to tax to be able to put together the bucket of money that's going to be able to meet that? I think you've got a very significant challenge, I suspect. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try, but you need to know what the difficulties are.
Oh, thank you for that. I mean, the whole purpose of this series is to begin dialogue around the reparations issue to see what kinds of compensation or levels of retribution would be possible to people, exploring mental trauma, possibly even measures to use profit sales of marijuana is something that I've read somewhere. That, possibly the slaves worked on the same land, and that's one situation that is being touted at the moment. There are various other ideas that we will be discussing in this series, and it's just very, very beneficial to talk about all the complexities, what we could face, and where we could go with all of this. Now I'm going to take it back to Justice Chowhan to talk a bit about what he feels a tribunal should be doing, or a commission. He mentioned that a commission would be more favorable, and whether that implementation, I mean, we're dealing with a lot of people and the complexities of that. What he would see is just, compensation in the face of all of this.
As a matter of fact, what the Honourable Phillips Ruddock has stated is a very important question. Where will you get the money from? So first of all, this is important, where you'll get the money from. I would suggest on this that the federal budget should allocate some funds every year for purposes of reparation. And then how this is to be distributed? Well, this can be assigned to any judicial forum to hear people and their petitions and find out who are the deservings and how much they deserve. Regarding appointment of constitution of a tribunal, I would say that will be premature. First of all, we have to really formulate things, and that will be done by a commission. A commission should formulate through thematic hearings and to find out the level of wrongs that have been done, And then this commission should also suggest compensation. Of course, you cannot compensate them uh, 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 in accordance with the amount of suffering they have gone through. But of course, it can be symbolic, and it can be to some extent helping them to come up with in a better lifestyle. And we must know that lifestyle is an important indication, even from the United Nations Charter, where lifestyle has been given importance. So you can improve their lifestyle in some ways, and through some funds. You can't give them, you can't compensate them fully. Many of them are, many of the generations have gone, some of the generations are no more there. So these descendants are really maybe the third or the fourth generation. But of course, the very fact that this idea is coming up of reparation and apology, this is going to bring about a lot of reconciliation. It will be a solace for those whose parents suffered or they suffered, because of course they couldn't grow because of the difficulty, economic difficulties in which they were placed. Otherwise, they would have rubbed shoulders with the richest people in United States or elsewhere. So I would suggest that a commission is the best answer, in my personal humble view. And then this commission, after formulating issues, give us the answers, which, of course, the Honourable Philip Ruddock has also suggested. So this is one way of doing it. But the fact that you will be proceeding with the recognition of the wrong and paying even nominal compensation will bring about a lot of reconciliation, and this will take away that spite in some people whom the blacks were calling as two bobs. So that set of mind will go away. Then they will start thinking that they are benign, they are friendly, and society should get together and forget the past. Bygones are bygones. So there must be some initiation and recognition. This is going to permeate down below, so that we no longer have events like the case of George Floyd. This is going to help. Now, of course, Honorable Philip Ruddock has raised another question, which is very important, and that is about discrimination in age. Now, how to resolve that? Uh, of course, we look forward to Australia resolving it, as Australia is very forward in resolving many issues. Anyway, let us also not forget that in the Middle East, there is some sort of a slavery going on. We have to raise voice someday about it, because of the bonded labor or labor which comes there, then they take away their passports, they can't leave the place. It's almost like slavery. We hear of sale of women in many countries, still more so in the Middle East, where people buy brides and so on, and then they go to the haram, and they are also slaves. So we have to address this. It's a universal problem, but raising a voice from the United States is going to be helpful, because that will be a pioneering step. And I must congratulate Alia Sarfraz for taking this initiative. I must also congratulate Philip Ruddock for being so candid about it, and having such sympathies for these people. I have seen his speech. He's always helpful to such people who have suffered, and he deserves our respect and congratulations. Well, this is what I had to say.
You are far too generous.
We also congratulate Candace Terry for the pioneering of this movement as well. We consider this as a birthing of a movement within the USA. This is something extraordinary. We're bringing forth a dialogue on the platform of AIA Inc. with TST Productions tonight. And this will be a series of dialogues which we consider the chapter of healing of America. And we, in fact, are furthering the cause of Abraham Lincoln and what he did and established within Illinois. We do feel that Illinois is one of the states that should be leading in this matter. We hope to carry on his spirit and continue with this dialogue. We do recognize that there are various challenges along the way when it comes to compensation, the trauma that was faced, whether or not, you know, the trauma includes some form of therapy in terms of counseling, whether or not other issues such as funding for education, whether it includes being more fair when it comes to giving preferential treatment in the hiring of certain people. These are all issues and things that we need to discuss going forward as well. There was some physical harm, there was mental harm, there was lost opportunities, there was material damages, loss of earning, and there's morale, their spirit was down. So whether or not it's just pure rehabilitation via monetary compensation is something that a lot of people will be discussing in this series. But we are grateful for having officials that have worked in the UN, for officials that have worked in Australia towards this cause, and hearing their insights and what they had to say and how they see America should be steering. If there are any lessons learned, we've all learned that slavery is not the place to be. No one should be inflicting that kind of harm and nobody should be suffering from that. I'll take it over to you, Candace Carey, for any closing remarks as well.
I just want to thank everyone, Honorable Philip Ruddock and Justice Chowhan, for spending time with us this evening, and good morning, good afternoon. Alia, thank you for partnering up with Axe International Artists and TST Productions to reignite this conversation. I didn't give you guys my background, but I am a professional actress. I've worked on $1 million movies that's shown all over the world. And but this is where God has had me right now, is to reignite reparations. And I think the timing is now for something like this. I'm hopeful. I am excited. And I look forward to meeting you guys, you two again, maybe in the near future, to see where we end up, our progress.
Well, I would like to interrupt, and forgive me for doing it. I would say that this is the right time for such a dialogue when Joe Biden is taking over the presidency of United States. He's a man with a heart, and I think this is the right time to agitate this thing and take steps. One step is the beginning of many thousand steps, and I hope that there'll be a healing process for America. And he's speaking about it. That is a good thing.
Can I take this opportunity as well to thank you for allowing me to participate? I want to wish you well with your deliberations. I thank the judge for his very complimentary remarks. Alia, great to know your family, and I know your many interests. Can I say, I hope you will keep me in touch with how it progresses, because your enthusiasm, I'm sure, will deliver real results. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable.
Thank you.
Ruddock. It's a pleasure seeing you. You don't look 77. You look much younger.
I keep up the exercise.
Okay. Well, and having that, good night and have a good day.
Thank you.
Until then.
Thank you, Alia.
Thank you again.
Thank you.